Just out of interest, those people that are involved in diving, could they stand up? It's just the one. Two. Great. Great. I thought I only had one, so I have two. And just to make sure that everybody else is still with me, can you stand up too, even if you're from swimming or diving? It's just stand up, and so I know that you're all listening. And good. Okay. Well, as I only have two people in the audience who are really from my sport, which is diving, I thought it was would be interesting for us to look at where we started with our sports. So if you just bear with me while I take you through some of these pictures. We started bridge diving, which is actually quite interesting because you'll be hearing over the next 12 hours about the introduction, hopefully, of high diving, where they jump off bridges. So we've gone a bit full circle in that we're going back to jumping off bridges from where we started as our discipline. With this gentleman in the Victorian era, that was how our sport started. Then moved on into the 1900s, when we first saw our first diving installation, which I think is pretty much made out of planks of wood, into a river, so no diving pit at this point. And then we moved on into 1924. I don't think any of us need to be particularly good judges to know that that dive is not going to make it. Okay. So I think he's going to have a very red back by the end of this dive. Then moving on into 1928, the only observation I have about this is that the judges in 1928 had much better sun protection than the ones that we have on outdoor pools these days. But obviously the judging is pretty much the same out of 10. Moving on into the 1936, this was the most interesting for me, having just finished the London Olympics. There were 20,000 spectators in 1926, and I think that's pretty much where we are now. So, and also the first time that diving boards were installed around a swimming pool as well, so quite interesting. Then moving on into the present day and the future, actually. As our sport develops and divers wish to do dives which are more difficult, the TDC really wrestle with, how do we move our diving on? How long is it going to be before we see a trampoline on the 10-metre to give those divers the extra height that they require in order to do those more difficult dives? When do we walk away from what started out as a very graceful sport and has now become such an athletic sport with more somersaults and more twists? So we wrestle with how the diving continues to be graceful, but also how we make it as interesting as it is today as one of the biggest spectator sports at the Olympic Games. One of the things that we introduced 6-7 years ago now is the FINA Diving World Series. When you look at the program of diving and how it is structured within FINA, we have obviously the world events with the World Championships, and then we had the Grand Prix events. But there was nothing in between which was as spectacular, other than the obvious, the Olympic Games. So in 2007, FINA decided to invest in the FINA Diving World Series. We have a number of series for a golden pot of prize money. Currently, our host cities across those few years have been Sheffield, a number in China, a number in Mexico, and some in the Arab states, as well as and Mexico, of course, always Mexico. So we have been very lucky in that we are taking the World Series to parts of the world that we never expected to be able to showcase our sport to. The athlete participation, because in the World Series we invite divers from the top 8 in the individual side of the sport and the top 6 in the synchronized sport. We continue to wrestle to ensure that our divers come from all parts of the world, but we still have the African continent that we need to embrace and engage that diving, and let's see some of your divers in our World Series. What is quite interesting is when you look at the medal winners across the few years that we've been running this event, and what was very interesting for us as a TDC is to see how some of the countries use it strategically in terms of their build-up for major events such as the World Championships and the Olympic Games. You'll note particularly with our Chinese friends that actually the year of an Olympic Games or World Championships, they actually didn't perform so well in the medals. And that's because obviously they are in that period of decline before they come back up for a major event. And that is something that we continue to wrestle with the World Series, is ensuring that we continue to have the best divers attending across all of the legs to ensure that we are giving the sponsors and the host countries the best possible show that we can give them. Like swimming, we've heard the Chinese are starting to win the medals in the swimming pool. We have been fairly dominated by China, but you can see also that the other countries around the world are also getting their fair share of medals. So it's not a case, as I so often hear, as we know who's going to win the medals at the diving event. Actually, we are seeing a fair spread of gold medals going to a lot of other countries as well. So it's not just dominated by one country. We are very lucky because we have a showcase event that we do enjoy immense investment from our sponsors. We've had Li Ning and certainly My Dear is our current sponsor, title sponsor across the World Series. But we enjoy significant investment in each of our host countries from other more local or national brands within each country, which again gives us the opportunity to leave a legacy and a development opportunity for our sport in each of those host towns and countries. One of the things that we are very proud of having been able to achieve is creating a platform, a stage, some animation for our sport. In each of the venues that we go to, we work very hard with the local organising team to brand a stage which showcases our sport. And you'll see in this slide Veracruz in the top left-hand corner. Down the bottom, China, who actually showcased all of their colours before they actually did their venue branding to make sure with the TV screens which worked the best. And I have to say my favourite in the years that I've been doing is the one in Doha, who used an extremely imaginative purple and lime green, which if you think about you'd have gone yuck, but actually you cannot see very well, but there is actually the outline of a filigree diver, and that diver is all made up in Arabic and using the words of enjoying to compete. So that is one that somebody used a huge amount of creative thought when presenting their platform for the diving. And then finally Moscow, using the backdrop of Moscow as their venue branding, and Beijing. We're always really excited whenever we take the World Series back to an Olympic pool. In the case of the World Series, we have now been back to Moscow, to London with the World Cup, and also to Beijing. All we need now is one more, and we will have been to them all. We've been to Mexico City, so we have enjoyed going to all of the Olympic venues, and the athletes actually get very excited about returning to an Olympic venue. As I said at the beginning of this presentation, diving enjoys audience figures which are enormous purely because of the spectacular. I don't know whether the spectators sitting at home in their living room is waiting for that person who's going to hit the board or find out what the next drama is going to be. In the case of London, we had a couple that actually got to the end of the board and fell off. I was fairly traumatised when I saw in the closing ceremony that they were actually included in all of the sports that did something wrong. So unfortunately for those athletes, I don't think they're going to get away for the fact that they got to the end of the board and fell off. But we enjoy huge audience figures in our television, and we also enjoy a good covering of people that not only take the live feed but also the taped feed, and that's something that we at the FINA marketing department will be working much harder to try and encourage more engagement with those country TV companies. So what is our development opportunities? Well, I'm sitting here, I think, sitting opposite a couple of gentlemen from the African continent, so we would love to take the World Series there, and I do believe that there is an opportunity for us to help in the development of a legacy for a sport. We'd like to go to Australia. Is there anyone here from Australia? It'd be really nice to take it to that end of the world as well. We have been successful in working with our local groups in terms of building the legacy. Great Britain, although I am British, I have to say that Great Britain do an outstanding job in terms of the types of activity that they put into the World Series. China is very good at using Facebook and Twitter and running people's Twitter feed up in the downtime between competitions. But we work very hard in ensuring that we give as much mileage as possible to each of our countries to try and develop the sport in those nations. And although we enjoy good sponsorship participation, there is always room for us to increase that, to have more product branding and to look at ways we can use that money in order to create more legacy value. So moving on, one of the big things that diving at the moment wrestles with is safety. I've joked about, the opportunity when somebody falls off of the board or when somebody hits the board, there is that sort of, wow, they came close to the board. I remember sitting in London and I was alongside the ambulance crews and the paramedics, and it was quite interesting to watch the faces of the paramedics sometimes when a diver went off the board, particularly on high board, and them wincing because they became a little bit too close. That is something that worries us greatly in diving, because whilst it is it's something that will hit all the news headlines when somebody hits the board, it also doesn't portray our sport particularly well. So we are spending a lot of our time considering how we can ensure that the sport is safer. One of the things that we are looking to introduce, if we can get the votes at the next convention, is the introduction of laser lights or infrared beams. It's because we truly believe that dives are getting too close, and we wrestle with what, in your view, is too close against the person sitting next to you in a judging panel who may not think it is too close. The other problem that we have is if the judges don't penalise a dive that's too close and leave it until after the competition and go and say, hey, your diver was just that little bit inside the diving board, the judge will look, the coach will look at you and say, how can you say that? It scored 8.5s. So how do we deal with that dilemma when a dive is technically, because it's too difficult, the strength isn't there in the diver, so it's being stood up much higher, brings it much closer to the board. So the introduction of the infrared beam would mean that that would be linked down to the referee on the referees panel. And if you see this one, then a flashing light would appear on that table, which basically says there will be a penalty. That would be viewed by a referee, because you have gone through the beam, as too close to the board. And that may be a maximum of 4 points or 4.5 points. That's still to be determined as we go through our consultation programme. But we do firmly believe that we need to ensure, as divers get more, the dives become more difficult, that right from the point of coaching, the agreement is that a dive has to be a certain distance away from the board. How do we do that in coaching techniques? Well, I'm already told that some people actually do have rubber hoses attached to the boards, and so that if a diver becomes too close, you feel that touch as you hit the rubber hose. But in terms of competitions and major competitions, it would be the introduction of a laser beam. The other things that we are looking at is the degree of difficulty table. This has been in existence for many, many years. It's serviced us very, very well over those few years. But again, as dives get more difficult and dives are being performed on the boards, same dives on the boards, we are seeing that there is disparity between the degrees of difficulty. So if I give you an example, a reverse 3.5 somersaults is actually much easier to do on a springboard than it is on a high board, because you have the ability to flip it up and you have more power coming out of the diving board. But actually, currently, using the formula, it scores a greater degree of difficulty than it does on a high board. So our team in the Technical Diving Committee, and also taking soundings from people who have a great deal of knowledge in putting these formula together, our intention is to break down the formula into two and to look at dives according to whether they are of greater difficulty from one board to another. And that is something that will be going to the convention in Barcelona next year. Universality, you know, I think I've heard it from everybody that is sitting at this table today, and that is that we need to ensure that whilst we give the best spectacular and the best athletes of our sport, that we are also embracing universality. And we need to ensure through all of our development in FINA that we are developing those nations that are slower in coming up the rankings in terms of diving. There are 2 continents that do not have or run regional championships. One of those is actually Australasia. It doesn't have a regional diving championships. Obviously, Europe has the Europeans, the Americas have theirs, but I think Africa doesn't have a regional championships, and neither does Australia, which is interesting. So again, we wish to ensure that through the work of the TGC, we continue to embrace universality across all of the nations of the world. And sometimes that's difficult for us to be able to argue when we aren't seeing that engagement from nations that are still needing to develop their diving. But we do have stars. We have we've had and we still continue to have big stars. I was horrified to but also pleased, it depends which way you look at it, to watch the arrival of the British team in Adelaide, and one young Mr. Daly was met by hundreds of screaming girls as he came out of the arrivals gate at Adelaide Airport for the FINA Juniors. In some ways it's great for us to have that following, but we also have to protect our athletes and protect our sport and the profile of our athletes. I was going to finish with probably with one of the biggest stars. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get you the cartoon, but actually even Goofy has starred in a Learn to Dive cartoon. So all the time that we continue to have these types of stars who go out and do their stuff, go about their business and perform, we will always have a sport that engages with a huge TV audience, a sport that will encourage people to participate. And our job as part of FINA and the Technical Diving Committee is to ensure that we make that sport as safe and as far-reaching across the nations of the world as possible. So thank you.